Hello, everybody. All right, my name is Maggie, and I am the marketing and outreach manager here at City Bookshop. I want to thank all of y'all for being here today, whether you're in person or tuning in from the live stream. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know about our next romance event that we have going on, where we're virtually hosting Tara DeWitt for her latest novel, The Co-op, on November 11th. We do a lot of great romance events and other events, and more information about that can be found on our website at ecitybookshop.com. Next, I have some housekeeping. So, number one, if you need a restroom, it is upstairs past the cash registers and the greeting cards. Two, if you're watching from home and experiencing any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat. My colleague Lainey Rose is monitoring that to help if necessary. We will also have time for questions tonight for both in-person and virtual attendees. So if you're watching via Zoom, please put those questions in the Q&A feature so that Lainey Rose will see them and can ask on your behalf. Four, if you need to purchase a copy of Fang Fiction, we have them upstairs at the register, and they can be purchased prior to the signing line. And finally, as a part of tonight's event, Kate wants to use her platform to raise money for the DC Abortion Fund, which is an organization and cause that we are more than happy to support. DCAF is one of the largest abortion funds in the US, supporting abortion seekers from DC and across the country. With zero eligibility requirements, connections to multiple area clinics, and a relentlessly supportive community behind them, they make abortion access happen for thousands every year. If you are able to donate, we have QR codes upstairs at the register, downstairs at the info desk, and kind of all around to donate directly to the fund. And from our Eventbrite sales, we've already raised about $650, which is awesome. I wrote in my notes in an effort to keep this intro short, but I have never been short a day in my life. I just have to say that it is my literal dream come true that we are hosting Kate Stayman-London tonight. When I read One to Watch during the summer of 2020, I felt understood in a life-altering way. It changed the way I view myself, the world, and most importantly, the Bachelor franchise. When I saw that Kate's next book was about vampires, I won't lie, I was a little nervy. I'm not a huge paranormal romance girly, but the way Kate tells stories not only honors the fandom she writes about, but also treats sensitive topics with such care. Her books are raw and real and fun and romantic all at the same time. With that in mind, Fang Fiction deals with themes of sexual violence. And though the conversation today won't be centered around that topic, we just wanted to give a disclaimer to that before the beginning. So on to the conversation. Our conversation partner tonight, Tia, is a nonprofit communications pro, gender specialist, and sommelier. She has worked on investment strategies addressing gender-based violence, reproductive health, and more. She served on the DC Abortion Fund board of directors for 5 years, including 2 years as the president. And the woman of the hour, Kate Stayman-London, is a novelist, screenwriter, political strategist, and bisexual double Libra. Her best-selling debut, One to Watch, was named a Best Book of the Year by Time, NPR, Marie Claire, Mashable, and more. Kate has written for political icons, including Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Cher. She is also a television writer, producer, and proud WGA captain. When not writing, Kate enjoys fabulous trips with friends, rewatching Buffy, and fighting for reproductive justice, as well as justice for Speak Now, Evermore, and Reputation. And now, please welcome Kate and Tia.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Oh, can everyone hear me okay? Can they? Oh, there's the internet. Hi, internet. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tia, and this is Kate,
It's me.
the woman of the hour. So right before we were going to start just by doing a quick spiel about DC Abortion Fund, aka DCAF, but you all did such a nice job already that I don't have that much more to say. But I'm going to do a really quick thing about why we're here. Who here knows the organization DC Abortion Fund? Just raise your hands. Okay, good amount of people. So just wanted to say really quickly, there's a lot of, I think everyone's aware that we're in a kind of massive abortion crisis in this country on many fronts. I think the things that get most reporting are things like loss of rights and clinics shutting down and the catastrophes that happen when people have pregnancy complications and states without care. I think what is less talked about is how there's been a kind of crisis of abortion access that goes way beyond the overturning of Roe v. Wade, just how difficult it is for people to access and afford abortion care. So abortion funds like DC Abortion Fund, exist all over the country just to make up the kind of gaps in funding for people who can't access care even when it's legal. And to be perfectly honest with you, I mean, it's hard to describe where we are in terms of the catastrophe of the gaps that people are facing. I mean, certainly Dobbs, because of clinics shutting down in states where there are abortion bans, has had awful effects. Right now we have a kind of pretty much abortion in most of the South is banned, and that means that Virginia and DC are often the kind of first point of contact. So we have tons of people traveling here. There have also been cuts by abortion organizations, by large national abortion organizations for actual access funding. So like Planned Parenthood has cut funding, putting more and more burden on independent clinics and funds, which is it's been like, I don't even know, I can't even put it into words how catastrophic it's been. So if, if you are able, I know many of you have already made donations, but if you're able to become recurring donors, amazing. Also, equally importantly, just talk to your friends and family in your life who, most people haven't heard of abortion funds, and that is where the kind of current crisis is on the forefront. So, I've had so many people after, come up and say, oh, you work on abortion. After Roe got overturned, I've doubled my Planned Parenthood donation. And like, all right. And I try to give them a more authentic smile than that, but also then try and tell them that that's not where your dollars are needed. So anyway, so shout out to there are QR codes everywhere for DC Abortion Fund, and would love donations, and please feel free to come and ask questions after this if you have questions.
Very good. Yay.
Anyway, all right. So so let's get started. So I'm so excited to be talking to my longtime and dear friend Kate about this book. So for people who don't know, Kate's first book, One to Watch, came out in 2020, so everything was virtual, and was set to depicted a Bachelor style reality show with a plus size heroine who was the Bachelorette essentially. So Kate, I know, every time I talk to you, I feel like you have 5, 6 new ideas for books and shows that you want to write.
Yeah.
So can you give us a little bit of an overview of this book, and then say how you decided to make this one your follow-up to One to Watch?
Yeah, so Fang Fiction tells the story of a woman who discovers that the world of her favorite vampire novels is a real place when she is asked to go there to rescue the sexy villain of the series. Sorry, I have a very resonant voice. So I really love fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy. I had never written fantasy before, and I came up with this idea, as you may expect, on January 6th, 2021, which was, of course, the day of the insurrection. And I had been working on a different idea for my second book, which was a bit more of a political, like explicitly political idea, a little bit dystopian. And it had been like a very long year of COVID isolation, and I live alone. So it was like isolation. And the insurrection was happening. And I was just like, I was just feeling like, I don't want to write a dystopian book. Like, the world is too dark. Like, we're there, man. Like, I don't need to imagine this. All I need to do is look at the television. And so I called my agent, and I was crying, and I was like, I just don't think I want to write it. And she was like, that's okay. What do you think you want to write instead? And I was like, a girl wakes up in Buffy. And she was like, okay, well, what do you think would happen next? And I was like, I don't know. And so that was the beginning of Fang Fiction. And, when I wrote One to Watch, it sort of all came to me in a rush. It was a very quick ideating process, and we sold the novel very quickly. With Fang Fiction, I had that sort of kernel of an idea. And then kind of the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh, there's like a lot of really interesting stuff here. But my agent was like, well, we've got to like give them a really detailed proposal to show them that you can write in the vampire novel fantasy genre. And I was like, we definitely have to show them that. And I didn't know how to do it, which was the flaw in the plan. So it ended up taking about 2 years to sort of figure out the story, figure out the world, figure out the characters, figure out when in the timeline of the story of the main character the book was taking place, the book within the book and that storyline, when was that taking place? Sort of like a lot of trial and error and figuring it out at first. And then once we sold it, because I had put in all of that thought beforehand, it only took about a year to write, which was much faster than one to watch. So yeah, so that's a little overview of Fang Fiction and the role that the insurrectionists played in my vampire novel.
Thanks, Jan 6. Yeah. So following up on that, so you've written 2 books now about sort of pop subculture fandoms in which you're immersed, right? The first book is about a reality show, and I know you've watched hundreds of hours of Bachelor.
That's a low estimate.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not, I was trying to. We're in public. And then this book is about vampires, and in addition to being a Buffy fanatic, you've watched and seen all the different books and shows. So when you went about creating your own versions of these worlds in your books, which parts felt easy based on your immersion in
really
the cultures, and then which parts were unexpectedly hard?
So I think the parts that were really fun for me was sort of like doing my own spin on a vampire mythology. And like sort of when you look at like Buffy or True Blood or Vampire Diaries or Twilight, like there are all these different rules of like the vampires in these different worlds. And it was super fun for me to be like, okay, so thematically, this book is about darkness and light. And it's about a woman who's an insomniac and she's spending time on this dark island full of vampires. And what she needs is to sort of let light back into her life. So I knew this wasn't going to be like Twilight, where the vampires simply sparkle in the daylight. I knew that daylight was going to really like murder these vampires. And that was like an important part of the mythology. So I really loved that. What was hard was I really didn't realize when you're writing, and like most vampire stories, right? It's like, we're in New Orleans and there are vampires here. We're in Sunnydale, California, and there are vampires here. And I was like, we're on a magical island that exists separately from our world. So it's like portal fantasy, right? Like the way the Wizard of Oz is, the way a lot Harry Potter, a lot of fantasy that we're very familiar with. But it really is creating a whole entire world where like it could be anything. And like everything could be anything, like how these creatures move, where they live, like every single, like what do they eat? Do they eat food? Where does the food come from? Why? Like every single little element of the story could have been anything. And I just really was not prepared for how much really hard work it took to be like, every single choice I made, you had to interrogate it and be like, is this right for the story? Does this make sense? Because I also didn't want this to be the kind of fantasy story where it's like, oh no, they're in trouble. The sword of Karatha will help them. Like I really wanted it to feel like quite grounded and in the real world, which meant that I had to like really push myself. My editor was very good about this too, being like, well, why? Well, why? Well, why? And it really got to a point where I was like, the book, sort of the A story takes place on this magical island full of vampires, and the B story takes place in New York City. And every time I got to a New York City chapter, I was like, they're just gonna take the subway. Like it was like just understanding the world was just like a real pleasure. So that part was definitely harder than I expected, but also like exciting because you get to be so imaginative.
Yeah. And I mean, that was one of the first things that struck me, was the extent of the kind of internal coherence of these fake worlds. So yeah, amazing. So shifting a little bit, so maybe, still talking about, Fang Fiction is a romance and a vampire novel. And as mentioned, it includes a storyline about sexual assault. So I was just wondering, I mean, maybe just, why did you include that? Why did you feel like the story and the genres could hold that.
Yeah, well, so the first thing is like for those of you who don't know me, and I know it was mentioned briefly in the bio, is my background is in politics, and I like the first thing I did after college was move to DC, and some people that I have worked with over the years are here tonight, which is very nice. And so like my sort of fiction work and screenwriting work is always sort of values driven, and I tend to write about issues that are really important to me. And one thing that I really love about horror, though Fang Fiction is not horror, it is not scary, but as a genre, is that sort of different kinds of monsters externalize different human fears. And so when you think about like ghost stories, they tend to be about grief, and zombie stories tend to be about death, and vampire stories tend to be about sex, love, rejection. So in thinking about what kind of story made sense as a vampire story, it was like, oh, this really sort of fits in with the genre and the kinds of stories that these creatures are right for telling. And then another piece is I always feel that when you're talking about a heavier issue, that setting it in a fantasy world or context, like it gives you a little bit of distance and makes it just like a little bit easier to sort of sit with what can be really tough emotions when if it's just like you're just like at a restaurant or it can feel a little too close to home. And when you can have that distance, it becomes a little bit easier to engage with that. And I really liked the idea of a survivor, like her healing journey was just like going on an adventure with vampires. I thought that was awesome. So I really wanted to do that.
Amazing. um, so um, talk so we were talking about this a bit earlier, but the topic of fandoms. I mean, fandoms are very topical right now. Obviously, people have always connected over shared cultural interests, but we're in this moment where I don't know, various factors have come together and led us to this moment where I guess the behaviors of people within certain fandoms is
Mm.
getting a lot of attention, is kind of influencing what content is made and canceled, with even kind of major movie studios starting to cite fandom behavior as a concern. So there's this whole negative conversation, I think, happening around fandoms, but I would
Yeah.
love to, your book is about people who are in a fandom and bond over fandoms. And I know fandoms are, important to you. And so I was wondering if you could reflect on, reflect on the conversation that's happening about fandoms and also where how
Yeah.
you see them and value them.
Yeah. And I obviously fandoms can be toxic, anything can be toxic, but like I find fandoms to be like really beautiful. And I love like, we're sitting here wearing our friendship bracelets. Like we've been to several Taylor Swift concerts together, and that's awesome. But I've a friend here who's like a really big Mets fan, and we text about the Mets all the time. And like I just love the way that fandom can be this thread of connection. And I especially think about internet fandom and the importance I especially think about like queer teenagers, right? And when you're in a space where you can't necessarily be your authentic self, fandom becomes a way to connect with other people. And like fandom is so weird, which is the thing that I love about it. I live not far in Los Angeles from the high school where they filmed Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and they do like fan events there once a year. And so my friends and I will like get dressed up and go to this high school that's like a literal place where teenagers go to high school. And like we're in our Buffy costumes, like dancing to 90s music. And like we're so weird, and so is everyone else there. And we all just like love that about each other. And so there's like a thing about fandom that is like, okay, we may be different in this way or that way, but like we really love this niche and weird thing together and like embrace each other. And that can become like a foundation for a real friendship. And I love that sort of fandom can exist in that way. And that's what I wanted to write about.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about some of the fandoms that you've been a part of? And
Sure.
like, you don't have to. I don't know. I just think it's interesting.
No, well, the Buffy fandom is definitely one, and that one's fun because it's sort of like after the fact now, so it's a little bit like queer and insular and fun. The Taylor Swift fandom is different because it's just like it's so big now, especially, but like, I've been in that fandom for I don't know what I'm looking at Jen, like 10 years now. Yeah, and there were times, I remember, there's some people here who I worked with in 2016 when Taylor Swift is Over party was trending, and I was like, please respect my privacy at this time. And like, but I don't know. I just I really like being a fan of things and sort of like doing too much and dressing up in costumes for the concerts and just sort of like having that excuse and that community where it's like permissible to do
Yeah.
more than you would normally do in your everyday life.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. So switching gears a little bit,
Yeah.
your one of the things about you that I'm just always dumbstruck at is your kind of range as a writer. So as mentioned, Kate wrote for the Hillary Clinton campaign, many other campaigns. You're a kind of digital political comms expert. You have a master's in screenwriting, and now this is your second novel. So can you talk about how your training in those kind of different genres and forms shows up when you're writing a novel like this?
Yeah, so my first training was actually in playwriting and we met in undergrad and college together and I was a playwriting major there. And my mentor was the playwright Constance Congdon, who's an incredible teacher. And her training was always that playwriting is a very auditory medium. So she always said, listen to what the characters say and then write it down. And so that I think is really great training for any other kind of writing that you want to do to sort of like be hearing what the characters say and then getting a master's in screenwriting. And I went to the University of Southern California, which kind of has a reputation for being like the most commercial of all the film schools in LA. But I really liked that it was very much like this is what three-act story structure is, and this is what happens in sequence one, and then it's the inciting incident, and then at the end of act one, you have the question that's answered, and in act two, and that sort of very basic three-act structure that you'll see in almost every major studio movie, that is really helpful to me in terms of how I plot out a novel. And I know a lot of novelists do not work that way. For me, it's like I want to know what's happening at the end of act one, what is our act two goal, what is our midpoint twist, what happens when we lose everything, like, and having those sort of like very clear story structure pieces helps me to then be like, okay, we're going to do a vampire story that's about a novel within these novels, and there's a fandom, and there's an island, and then there's two mysteries and two romances. And like, I find it when I like to do these kind of like big, complicated plots, but like keeping it really simple and clear in terms of that overarching kind of traditional Western goal based, problem based storytelling makes it easier for me to sort of then go play around.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, um, so Fang Fiction Fang Fiction has a kind of one relatively conventional romance storyline within it, right? But one of the things that I was really struck by was that it has this whole network of bonds and relationships that are formed that are, a lot of them are kind of bonds of friendship and even just bonds of care. And none of those were all happening, and none of them felt subservient or secondary to the romantic plot line. So I was wondering, just how did you think about the sort of map of bonds and relationships in the story?
So to me, the central, like the relationship that gets the most airtime in the book is definitely the central romantic relationship. But there's a central friendship in the story, the protagonist and her best friend. And to me, that is the central relationship of the story. Like, I can have an ending of this book where the romance doesn't get a happily ever after. I cannot have an ending of this book where the friendship issue doesn't get resolved. Like, that is what is like the inciting incident of the whole story. And that is the way we resolve the whole story, is what is going on in this friendship. And like, we've talked about this a lot. Like, I am strongly of the belief that romantic relationships and platonic, like, one isn't more important than the other, right? And that like platonic relationships can be lifelong and meaningful in a way that a lot of romantic relationships aren't, like especially among women. And I really wanted to, and especially in sort of telling a survivor story, in my experience, when like your friend is who's going to know when you've been through that, and your friend is who's you're going to talk to when you've been through that. And I really, really wanted to honor that friendship as being, like, in my mind, the most important relationship in the story. And then it's like, we have a brother sister relationship that's obviously really important. We have two romances, and we have sort of all these other things that are going on. But again, sort of the same way that when I'm clear on the storytelling rules, I can then go play around with plot stuff. When I'm clear on the central relationship, then I can go play around with character stuff and sort of like have it all branch from that.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, sort of related to that, and we've talked a lot about um, how certain genres are valued or devalued because of who writes and
Yeah.
reads them, right? I mean, it's very the genres that women, people of color tend to work more in are just not valued in the same way. I mean, how do you how when you know you're writing something that is, in a genre that is very gendered and that there's all sorts of, conversation around, like, how do you think about that? What do you say to people who think that romance is a kind of lesser literary genre?
And first of all, like, what are you reading that's so much fun? Like, like, come, the water's warm. You can read books that you enjoy. You're allowed to. We encourage it. But also it's like, I find that, and sort of when one to watch came out in 2020 was kind of at the beginning of this like rom-com renaissance that's really happened. Like Beach Read by Emily Henry had just come out like just before, and it was like Jasmine Guillory and Casey McQuiston. Like it was kind of just starting then, and now it's like we are in it. It is all happening, and it's like I kind of like having permission to like do what I want. Whereas like if I was writing, I mean, I love literary fiction and I read literary fiction. I don't want to be disparaging of it. But like if I was writing in a way where I'm like really just trying to get, a prize or whatever, like those sorts of critics and folks to like value my work, I think I would feel a little self-conscious about like, I want to read a half a page description about the fabulous dress Octavia is wearing. And like, I feel like in writing for genres that have been sort of like more traditionally been like, oh, well, this is for women, so whatever. Also, like, again, who do you think is buying books? It isn't men. But I really enjoy being able to play in that space, being able to talk to who I feel like is really my audience. And shout to the men tonight. I love and appreciate you. But like, we know who we're marketing to. And like it just gives me permission to play, to have more fun, but also to be like really subversive and sort of thinking about the politics of what I'm writing and who I'm talking to. Like I forget who I was talking to about this, but like every time someone follows me on Instagram and they're like, I'm a mom in the Midwest and I love Jesus, I'm like, I got you. like come on in. We're gonna level up your feminism. This is gonna be great. And it's like my publishers encourage me to do that. They love that, right? And like I think that if I were trying to quote unquote be more prestigious or something, then I wouldn't get to have as much fun and be as subversive in what I write. And then I also think about like a kind of shame on me thing is when I was a teenager, I didn't watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer because I was like, oh, that's a show for teenage girls, and like I'm watching The Sopranos, and it's like, okay, like The Sopranos is very good, and I'm from Montclair, New Jersey, and great, but like Buffy is awesome, and all I did was deprive myself of something that I really loved because I thought that I was like, I don't know, stylistically too good for it or something. And like art that takes women seriously, art that takes teenage girls seriously, and like genre is a place where you can kind of do that in a way that you don't necessarily get to. So I love sort of like being in that club, and I'm very happy that they would have me as a member.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? Time check. Do we have, yeah, okay. So a couple more questions before we go to audience questions, and everyone, please, yeah, gather your questions. Um, can you, so I know that often when I'm spending time with Kate, something ridiculous happens and I'll sort of
no.
hit her and say, oh, right, we should put this in a book. So can you, you should put it in a book. So can you, I don't know, can you share a moment in your personal life in which something happened, you thought, oh, this has to make it into the book, and it did actually make it into the book or screenplay?
Oh, of Fang Fiction.
And it, I mean,
Oh, of any book.
of any book, it's, yeah.
Well, since Jen is here, I'll talk about my friends and I did have a bachelorette fantasy league, which is dramatized and one to watch. There's like an ongoing Slack chat in that book that is like each individual person is like memorialized in that book. Although the two people who get together in that book, like the character Jen is based on and a different character, get together at the end of that book, and the character Jen gets together with is not her husband. So sorry to Nick. He's on business this week. He's not here. Sorry, Nick. So that was a fun one. And like, yeah, with this one, it was like, all the Buffy stuff, and sort of different, like there are a lot of little like Buffy Easter eggs in there that folks who have watched Buffy will notice. And people have tagged me and they're like, is out for a walk? Is that? And I'm like, yeah, it definitely is. So yeah, there are a lot of good Easter eggs in there.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Um, So was there something when you set out to write Fang Fiction, was there something that was in the initial draft that was just like key that you loved that was going to be the center of it that ended up not being in the final draft that ended up falling out?
Not really. Some things, the order of some things changed. Like there's a, it was really important to me in sort of thinking about Tess's past trauma that I didn't want to write any sort of graphic descriptions or anything like that. But there is a flashback sequence that sort of takes you back to her headspace during that, like that earlier time in her life that where all the trauma has sort of stemmed from. And that was originally in like chapter 2 of the book, which is like a bummer of a way to start a book. And so that's now much, much later in the story that comes. There was like, so one thing that we haven't talked about is sort of the world of the Isle, this island that the vampires are on. It's geographically based on Manhattan. And so there are a lot of like landmarks that you can sort of find of like, oh, the forest in the middle of the island is Central Park. And here's the Crystal Bridge. It's the Brooklyn Bridge. Like it just makes it made it easier for me anyway to orient myself. And in the first draft, there was a whole sort of like side quest that happened where they went up to sort of like the wild forest in the north of the Isle. That's sort of like where the cloisters are in Manhattan. And it was like a lot of like very like pretty descriptions of the world and like fun. And my editor was like, so this doesn't advance the story at all. And I was like, you noticed. So we did cut that, sadly. And that was fun to write.
Yeah. Amazing. Did you have any moments like that with your characters where you felt you got attached to them and then there were things that needed to happen to them that you didn't want to have happen to them? Or
Yeah, there was one. So the character of Joni, who's the best friend character in the first draft, she had this sort of like on again, off again lesbian situationship that if you've ever been in one, you know about the girl who's like, oh, you're my girlfriend. Oh, I'm so busy. And like, it was like one of those relationships, which was really fun to write and sort of eviscerate that particular sort of lesbian. But it again, it was like just not serving the character and was kind of taking up real estate in page space that wasn't necessarily advancing that character journey as much, and we could get there faster. So that was one I had to lose.
yeah.
R.I.P. Joni's toxic girlfriend.
Yeah. I mean, sequel, like
Yeah, that's
whatever
right.
it's called, fanfiction side. So I have a couple more questions and then I think we
Yeah.
go to audience questions. Just going back to the Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
fandom
Oh,
of
great.
it all.
Good. Yeah. Important.
I mean, so the first question is, which album would you pair with your first two books?
One to watch, Speak Now, Fang Fiction, Reputation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
say?
No, I feel very strongly about that.
Can you say more?
Yeah. So one to watch is sort of like the thing I really we've talked about this. The thing I love about Speak Now is, so we're just gonna get into it, guys.
Yeah.
So after Taylor Swift won the Grammy for Album of the Year for Fearless, she was the youngest woman ever to win that award. And a lot of people were like, well, she doesn't really write her own songs. And at 20 years old, she had the presence of mind to write her entire next album, Speak Now, entirely without co-writers, which I just think is badass. And like, I certainly wouldn't have had that presence of mind at 20 years old. And so Speak Now, to me, it's like, it's purple and it's sparkly and it's princesses, but like underneath, it's like actually something way more important than that she was doing with that album. And that to me is sort of like what my goal was anyway for one to watch, that it's like a fashion blogger and she's on a reality show and all the men are dating her and they're in Paris, but like underneath it, hopefully we're talking about like independence and how you value yourself and the male gaze and like more important stuff. And then Reputation is an album that Taylor talks about the visual of it being like nighttime in a cityscape, and you're kind of, and I remember when Reputation came out and I would be like in New York City and like listening to it in my headphones and like wearing my big black boots and like stomping around the city. And that's just like so the vibe of Fang Fiction to me. But then also like Reputation kind of has like this soft, tender underbelly, and that's also very Fang Fiction to me.
Yeah, amazing. I don't. Do you have a sense of what albums your next books are going to be?
Yes.
You can't
to be clear, I have not
sold
sold these books yet.
Yeah,
I
so
do
we
know
don't-
what Taylor Swift eras they represent. As of now, all subject to change. Book three is an arc that goes from Fearless to Folklore, and book 4 is Midnights.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Like, no
We
one
broke
else
some
knew
news.
what books are about, but
Don't get mad at me, my agent, if you're watching.
Yeah.
We're going to find out if she watched or not.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, so thank you so much. You're amazing. Let's take questions from the audience. I'm sure people have many questions that
Oh,
virtual.
virtual
Okay.
questions. Thank you, Internet.
Yeah.
One is, can you talk about who your favorite Buffy characters are?
Yes. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. So the question is, who are your favorite Buffy characters and what's your favorite arc in the show overall? So, I mean, there are a lot of them. Faith is a favorite for me. Spike is a favorite for me. If you read Fang Fiction, you're like not surprised by any of this. Cordelia is a huge favorite for me. Also, again, you're not surprised. Favorite arcs in the show. I mean, I just have to say Spike, right? Like Spike's arc is just like from when you meet him until the season 7 finale, like it keeps being interesting and it keeps being wonderful. And there's one choice they made that they shouldn't have made, and we all have to live with it, and that's okay. But yeah, that's my favorite.
Amazing.
And do we have another virtual
Yeah.
question? Yeah.
If you could pick the setting in which someone sits down and reads the book,
It's a great question. Okay, so the question is, if I could pick a place for you to read the book, the atmosphere, what you're drinking, what you're wearing, what would that be? And so I would say like a Gothic Victorian like townhouse in New York City, and it's nighttime, and you're wearing like silk sleepwear, just like extravagantly expensive silk sleepwear, and drinking either like a dark, frothy, herbaceous glass of Lambrusco, which is sort of like giving you True Blood vibes, or for an NA option, maybe just like a really like herbaceous, delicious kind of like botanical soda situation that you're just like sipping on while you read Fang Fiction. Great and excellent question. Yeah.
Amazing. Yes, over there.
Hi. Go. Oh, written in the city of. So the question is, what's one of your favorite books that's been written in the city of DC? And I will answer Party of Two by Jasmine Guillory. And Jasmine is like a real queen of the rom-com genre and has been like super supportive of me in my career. Jasmine and I actually became internet friends when I was working for Hillary Clinton, and she was just like a nice lady on Twitter, and she would say nice supportive things, and I was like, this lady's awesome. And then that lady wrote The Wedding Date and became like a huge bestseller. And her book Party of Two is set in DC and is just like a lovely romance that also, I think, in a smart way deals with the reality of being a person kind of like dating in the political world, and kind of like you love somebody, like there's tension maybe in terms of like their behavior and their values and your values. And I like that book a lot. Sure. Hi, Laura. Guys, that's Laura Hankin. She's a wonderful writer. If you haven't read her books, you should read her books. So the question was that I was working on this book while I was also working in TV, and is it hard to do both at the same time? And so sort of one of the reasons this book came out 4 years after One to Watch instead of sooner was that I wrote on 3 seasons of the iCarly reboot on Paramount Plus between then and now. And the answer is like when you're sort of like deep in the season, like multicam is just because basically the way multicam sitcoms work is you are shooting an episode each week, and it's like table read on Monday, done shooting on Friday, and like every day you're rewriting the script. And the hours are just like, it's the most crazy hours of any kind of TV writing you can do. And so the answer is no, you're not. I was not working, but I was. So we did sell the proposal during sort of the early days of season 3 before we went into production. And I would sort of like Like when you're working on a multicam, it can become like so all consuming that it's like nice to have like a little place you can kind of like sneak away and feel like you're just like, I'm gonna go be with my vampires now. And so that was like what Fang Fiction was for me during that time. But then the bulk of the we had a very short hiatus between season 1 and season 2. So basically the entire year of 2021 after the insurrection, I didn't get a ton of novel writing done. But then in 2022, we had a longer hiatus between season 2 and season 3. And that was when I wrote the big bulk of the proposal. And then during season 3, I'll tell you something I shouldn't have done, which is you get a week off to go on script. But which is like, whatever episode that you're writing, you have a week to like leave the writer's room and go write the script. But I'm a pretty fast writer, so I wrote my script in 2 days and spent the rest of the week working on the Fang Fiction proposal. It all worked out fine. But yeah, so that's the answer to that question. Good question.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about how your first novels are based in very existing fandoms. I was wondering if you ever found yourself kind of slipping too close to the existing IP, and if so, how did you kind of find your own voice and draw yourself back out of it?
That's such a good question. So the question was, my first 2 novels sort of do my own spins on existing fandoms, and did I ever find myself kind of slipping too close to something that already exists? And the answer is I sort of very deliberately thought about this, where I would, with One to Watch, it was literal, like I sat down on my living room floor and wrote on index cards like different bachelor tropes, like the virgin or the one who keeps their kids a secret or whatever. And then I thought, like, how can I subvert those tropes? Like, what can I do to talk about them in a different way? And I actually recently found like my very first brainstorming document for Fang Fiction, and the same stuff was in there. It was like, okay, this like the serious sappy hero, like, what do we think of this character? Like, how do we talk about something different? And like one of the ideas I'm really interested in this novel is heroes and villains, and sort of thinking about like, okay, well, traditionally, when we think of a hero, we're thinking of a man who is super self-sacrificing. And when we talk about a woman who's self-sacrificing, well, then she's just a stay-at-home mom and we look down on her, right? And like, so it's sort of thinking about like how gendered those tropes can be and how to subvert them and flip them around. And I think that's what really helped me from kind of forming my own distance between those fandoms in mine, was sort of explicitly being like, here are the tropes that exist. Here's what I want to do that's different.
First of all, thank you for your service to iPart.
You're so welcome.
If you were to make a film adaptation of One to Watch, first of all, would you write the screenplay yourself? Second, who would you cast as the main characters? Who would you want?
This is a complicated question that I can't totally answer for reasons. But so I can, what easy one to answer is yes, I do intend to adapt all my books myself, and that is like when we send the books out to producers, that's like a caveat of like, if you would like to option this book, Kate will be adapting. And then they're like, oh, an author adapting her own work, and then they're like, oh, she's a TV writer producer, and it's like, yeah, I do that too. And then they're like, that's okay. So who would I want to cast? Well, one thing I can tell you is that so when I was writing One to Watch, there's like a toxic bad ex-boyfriend character in that book, and I always pictured Max Minghella when I was writing it. And at that time I lived in Silver Lake, which is also where Max Minghella lives. And one day I was like writing in the coffee shop on my corner, and he came in, and I was like, oh no. He's right there. And then there's also a pansexual Frenchman who has chemistry with everyone. And in my mind, it was obviously Oscar Isaac. Yeah. 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 So those are the ones I can tell you about. Yeah. Great question.
She said, love the Taylor Swift references and talk. Non-book related question. Are you seeing her again live before the Eras tour ends? And then book related, how does your reading life change while you are writing a novel?
Oh, that's a great question. So am I seeing the Eras tour again? I am. So my stepmom, who has never been a Swiftie in the past, became a really big Swiftie this year, which was like the sweetest. Like she'll text me and be like, "Red is so good," and I'm like, "It is good, Dee Dee." But she decided. So this year is the 25th anniversary of the year I first met my stepmom. I was in high school when we met, and so she decided for our 25th like anniversary trip, we're gonna go to see the Eras tour together. So we're going in Toronto, which is like it's real cute. It's real cute. I love my stepmom very much. And then the second question wasn't about Taylor. You want to tell me the non-Taylor Swift question again? Yeah, how does my reading life change while I'm writing a novel? Yeah, so I think when I'm writing a novel, like in general, I read a lot in the rom-com space just because like that's like I'm blurbing and I'm friendly with those authors and I want to be like supporting their work and I want to know what's happening in the genre space like for my own like business reasons. And then but like when I'm writing in that space, it's like I just want to be reading anything different. So it's like, am I reading a thriller or literary fiction, or I just sort of like to be out of the space of what I'm writing a lot because generally when I'm ideating, I'm reading a ton in the exact space that I'm writing just to like sort of see what has been done in that space before and how can I sort of differentiate what I'm doing to what other books have done and what has worked and not worked in those books. And then sort of once I've kind of done that sort of like brain osmosis at the beginning of the process, I like to kind of get away from it and kind of just like only be in the world of my own book and not letting other people's writing influence me too much. Yeah, it's a great question.
Do you have any really good sapphic book recommendations that you've got recently?
Oh, really good sapphic book recommendations. Now I'm like drawing a complete blank. Like, yeah, obviously always. I should mention, so I'm really lucky to be at the Dial Press, which is just an awesome imprint of Random House that like really focuses on women and queer people in terms of what they put out. And Katie Nishimoto is one of the editors at Dial Press, and everything Katie edits basically is an awesome sapphic book. And so all of Susie Dumond's books are really good. Georgia Clark just had a new book come out today, which I haven't read yet and I'm excited about. But like, just go look at Katie Nishimoto's Instagram and everything she edits is like awesome sapphic books. And I just I just love Katie and I'm a bit of a fangirl of hers. I like everything she does. Yeah.
Questions?
Oh, I see one.
First question is, given that you were working as a writing, was it always your novelist? And did you have a mentor that helped get you there, or was that sort of
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, in undergrad, I took one sort of like prose writing class with a fairly famous novelist who I will not name, who made me feel like I wasn't very good at it. And so I was like, oh, I guess I'm just not good at this. And like the playwriting thing went really well, and I really loved that. And then I applied for grad school in screenwriting, and so I was sort of going down that path. And then in screenwriting school, one of my best friends who I met there was the novelist Morgan Matson, who writes amazing young adult novels. If you like my books, read Morgan's books. You will love Morgan's books. And Morgan was like, hey, you should write a novel. And I was like, cool. I don't know how, but like, I guess I could try, whatever. And it was sort of like on my mind that it was a thing I wanted to do, but it wasn't a huge priority for me. And then a political friend of mine knew the guy who invented California closets. This is where you thought this was going, right? And the guy who had invented California closets wanted to write a business memoir. And so this friend of mine put me in touch with him to be like, do you want to like ghostwrite this guy's business memoir? And I was like, I'm into paychecks. So like, yeah, sure. And then, but I didn't know like what should you get paid for like ghostwriting a California closets business memoir. So another political friend of mine, I knew had a friend who was a literary agent, and I was like, hey, would you mind putting me in touch with your agent friend? Just to like, she can just do this deal and take a commission. I just don't know how much I should be asking for or what. And so my friend puts me in touch with his friend. She's so excited to be in touch with me. And I'm like, yeah. And like, you can just take the commission on this deal. No big deal. And she was like, no. I want to represent you as a writer. And I was like, did you want to like read anything I've written ever? And she was like, no, I've read your makeup blog on Tumblr and I think it's pretty well written. And so I'd like to be your agent. So whenever people are like, how do I get a literary agent? I'm like, I don't know, have a makeup blog on Tumblr with like 10 to 15 readers. And I guess like if one of them is a literary agent, then maybe that'll work out for you. So it was like a very roundabout. So like between Morgan and my agent, then it became like, okay, let me really think about what I might like to write as a novel. And I actually wrote a young adult manuscript that we never sold. No one bought it. And I was devastated. I was like, oh man, I'm just never going to be a novelist. And then I got offered a job with Hillary Clinton. I was like, guess I'll do that. My young adult novel didn't sell. I suppose I'll go try to elect a president of the United States. And then that's, again, how we just always make decisions. But now it's like, oh, thank goodness. Like that would have like set my career in a really different direction that I think was much less authentic to who I was and much more like my friend writes young adult novels. I guess I'll just try to do that. And I'm just like much happier with how it's gone since then. So that is the long answer and winding answer to your question. Yeah, the way you do it. Sure. Huh? Oh, yeah.
What would you like to be the plot of a Fang Fiction fan fiction?
Oh, a Fang Fiction fan fiction. That's a great question. What would you like to be the plot of a Fang Fiction fan fiction? So there's a portal witch named Flora, who's a character in Fang Fiction, and I think Flora deserves her own romance. And I would love for a fan fiction writer to do some thinking about who might be the right person for Flora. Yeah, that's a great question. I like that a lot. Yeah.
You see the protagonist of your two books being friends, or any of the other characters in the books being friends? I think that was
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that so B is the protagonist of One to Watch and Tess is the protagonist of Fang Fiction. They like have similarities, but they're kind of quite different. Like I think they would bond about fashion a little, but I think like B is such an extrovert and Tess is so guarded that I think they might have a hard time. But I think their best friends, Joni and Marin, would like just get on like a house on fire. And that would be like what brought the whole friend group together would be like Joni and Marin would be the connectors for B and Tess and would kind of like get the whole group going along. And certainly like vampires and men on reality shows, there's like plenty of overlap in those two groups of people. So I think that they would find their friends there.
add on to that question. If there was Fang Fiction, Buffy the Vampire Slayer overlap fiction,
Oh boy.
what do you think would happen to Spike and all the other characters?
What do I think would happen with Spike and all the other characters? So the thing about Spike is he's kind of a little baby, which is like what we love about him. And I think that quite possibly the vampires of Fang Fiction would do away with Spike in pretty short order, which would be too bad. And I personally would mourn that death deeply. But I don't know how long Spike would really last in the world. Because like the Buffy world is just like, I think a little bit easier to live through than the Fang Fiction world. Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the takeaways would be plot. Here with the vampire shop, do you have kind of two takeaways for people who
Yeah. That's a great. So the question was, in One to Watch, it kind of dealt with sort of like preconceived notions of the reality TV space, and does Fang Fiction similarly deal with preconceived notions in the vampire space? And the thing that I loved about reader reactions to One to Watch, people would be like, "If you love The Bachelor, you have to read this book," and then people would be like, "I hate The Bachelor, and that's why you have to read this book." And like, I appreciate that. I was like, okay, I feel like I've done my job here, and sort of like loving a thing and paying homage to it and also being critical of it. I think that Fang Fiction is probably, I find vampire stories in general to be less problematic than I find The Bachelor to be. And so I think like Fang Fiction, I hope fits into like a really proud tradition of like Anne Rice and Buffy. And like there's a lot of like good feminist vampire storytelling. And I hope that I'm like walking in the footsteps of those folks rather than trying to like subvert and like show like, hey, this is what The Bachelor is like. But wouldn't it be better if it could be like this, and showing like that better way that it could be? And like certainly other people have been doing that in the vampire space for a really long time. So I guess my hope is that maybe if someone who read One to Watch read Fang Fiction and had never read or engaged with like vampire media before and was sort of like, I don't know, isn't it all that Twilight stuff? And like, aren't they just glittery in the daylight or whatever? That it's like, okay, well, like they're not all like purity culture and like vaguely vampirized Mormon stuff, that like there is a lot of like really awesome vampire storytelling out there, and hopefully people would go and find it.
We have time for one more question.
All right.
So
Go ahead.
I'm a big fan of dystopian
Nice.
reading, and since we started with sort of a political message here and looking sort of at your past, what do we all need to go do that
Oh.
gets you to write a dystopian book because the world's gotten better?
Oh, great question. So the question is, so at the beginning we were talking about how the world was too depressing for me to write a dystopian book. And the answer and the question now is like, what can we do to make the world better so that I will again be inspired to write a dystopian book? Uh, so I think, the thing is to like, I think romance readers are so awesome. And like, how can you make the world more like you? Like vote, definitely give money to the DC abortion fund tonight if you can, or volunteer, become involved in some other way. But it's like, is there a neighborhood meeting that you can show up for? Is there someone in your life who you can help get involved, who you can have a conversation with on a human level? Like, think about you and sort of like all the like awesome feminist pro queer stuff you're doing in your reading life and in your everyday life, and then just think like, how can I politicize that? How can I turn that into an action of getting involved at the local level, at something bigger than the local level? Yeah, and just sort of think about like all these values that are so common to romance readers. How do we put those values into practice? Yeah.
I think that's a
Right.
perfect and beautiful way to end. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's a beautiful way to tie everything together. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, people over here. I like doing this.
All right. Again, thank you guys for joining us tonight. And thank you to Kate and Tia for such an awesome conversation. We're going to take the next couple of minutes to kind of flip the space. So our signing line is going to be set up over here. So the line will actually start right here at this little corner where it says games and kind of wrap through our children's section, keeping space for the stairs. So if you'd like to purchase a copy of any of Kate's books, we have those upstairs at the register. And if you are willing and able to fold your chair and set it to the side, a staff member will come and grab them. And we greatly appreciate that. But thank you guys so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you.